You know the name, Genghis Khan. It is a name that echoes through history like a thunderclap. To the history books, he is the mastermind who forged the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen, stretching from the snowy tundras of Siberia to the warm waters of the Danube. He is hailed as a military prodigy, a unifier of the Silk Road, and a surprisingly tolerant ruler regarding religion. But there is a shadow cast by this colossus that is often ignored. While we marvel at the map he painted in Mongol boundaries, we forget the ink he used was human blood. We're not just talking about winning battles or outmaneuvering armies. We are talking about a man who turned cruelty into an industrial process. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he dismantled their very humanity. From using living populations as biological weapons to literally altering the climate of the planet through mass slaughter. This is the untold, nightmarish truth of the Mongol conquest. Prepare yourself. We are about to peel back the layers of the legend to reveal the monster underneath. One of the most disturbing strategies Genghis Khan perfected wasn't a new type of bow or a faster horse. It was a tactic known as the Khashar. Historical accounts from the Persian chroniclers paint a terrifying picture of this method. When the Mongol army approached a fortified city, the defenders on the walls would look out and see a massive crowd marching at the front of the Mongol line. At first, they might have hesitated, thinking it was a diplomatic envoy. But as the crowd got closer, the horror set in. These weren't soldiers, they were civilians. They were the fathers, brothers, and sons captured from the neighboring villages. Genghis Khan forced thousands of captives to march directly into the line of fire. Think about the psychological devastation of that moment. The defenders on the wall had to make an impossible choice: hold their fire and let the Mongols breach the gates, or slaughter their own innocent countrymen to get to the enemy. It was a calculated, cold-blooded move: sacrifice the slaves to save the Mongol troopers. In 1209, during the invasion of the Tangut Kingdom, this tactic reached a horrifying industrial scale. Records indicate that Genghis Khan forced nearly 30,000 captured Chinese soldiers and civilians to march on their own capital. But it wasn't just about absorbing arrows. In some sieges, when moats prevented the Mongol horses from reaching the walls, the Khashar were not just used as shields, they were used as fill. Captives were forced to jump into the moats layer by layer, carrying sandbags or simply using their own bodies until the ditch was level with the ground. The Mongol cavalry would then ride over a bridge of human flesh to sack the city. This wasn't war, it was a massacre of unwilling pawns, wiped out simply to pave a road for the Khan's ambition. But the horror didn't stop on the battlefield. For those who survived the initial slaughter, the nightmare was just beginning. Genghis Khan treated violence like a spectator sport, and his generals followed suit. There is perhaps no story more chilling than the aftermath of the Battle of the Khonka River in 1223. This event captures the sheer aristocratic cruelty of the Mongol elite. After defeating a coalition of Kievan Rus princes, the Mongols captured the surviving nobility. They didn't execute them quickly. Instead, they dug a large pit and laid the princes inside it. They then covered the pit with heavy wooden planks. What happened next is the stuff of nightmares. The Mongol generals, including the legendary Subutai, set up their victory feast on top of those planks.
As they drank their fermented mare's milk and celebrated their victory, the heavy wooden floorboards pressed down on the living men underneath. The Russian princes were slowly crushed and suffocated to death, their screams drowned out by the laughter and stomping feet of the Mongol celebration above. This wasn't just execution, it was theater. It sent a message to the world that the Mongol aristocracy literally stood upon the crushed bones of their enemies. And then there were the loyalty tests and the specific vengeance enactments. This is where the story gets personal. In 1219, the governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, made the fatal mistake of seizing a Mongol trade caravan and insulting Genghis Khan's ambassadors. The Khan's retaliation was apocalyptic. When the city finally fell, Genghis didn't just want Inalchuq dead, he wanted him to suffer an agonizing, symbolic end. According to some historical accounts, Genghis Khan ordered that molten silver be poured into the governor's eyes and ears. It was a gruesome statement. You hungered for my wealth? Here, consume it until it kills you. We see the same blind apocalyptic rage in the siege of Nishapur in 1221, when Genghis Khan's favorite son-in-law, Tokachar, was killed by an arrow from the city walls. The Khan's response was to authorize a genocide so complete it is hard for the modern mind to comprehend. He ordered that every living thing in the city be killed. Not just the soldiers, not just the men. He ordered the execution of the women, the children, the elderly, and even the cats and dogs in the streets. He wanted the city entirely lifeless. To ensure the count was accurate, the Mongol soldiers were ordered to sever the heads of the victims and stack them in pyramids. They built 3 separate pyramids, one for men, one for women, and one for children. It was a twisted architectural project built from death. In a final, chilling act of cruelty, he reportedly forced his own widowed daughter to sit before the city and witness the carnage, ensuring that the blood-red streets and the silence of the grave would be the last thing she remembered of her husband's killers. However, Genghis Khan's impact goes beyond the immediate horror of torture. He killed so many people that he actually changed the Earth's atmosphere. This is a new perspective that modern science has brought to light. The Mongol invasions were so deadly that they wiped out approximately 40 million people. That was roughly 10% of the world's population at the time. To put that in perspective, if a similar event happened today, it would be the equivalent of killing over 700 million people. Because so many people were removed from the face of the earth, millions of acres of cultivated farmland were abandoned. Without humans to farm it, this land reverted to forest. These new forests absorbed so much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that it caused a measurable drop in global temperatures. Think about that. One man's rampage was so destructive that it scrubbed nearly 700 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere, effectively cooling the planet. He is the only human in history to have ever caused man-made climate change by reducing the human footprint through mass slaughter. Then there is the aspect of his reign that changed the biological fabric of the human race forever. Genghis Khan's dominance wasn't just about land, it was about absolute ownership over people. And nowhere was this more apparent than in his systematic sexual exploitation of the populations he conquered. The stories of his insatiable nature aren't just myths, they were a structured part of the Mongol spoils system. After a conquest, women were sorted. The most beautiful were presented to the Khan, then to his generals, and then down the ranks. Genghis Khan famously defined his greatest happiness with this quote, "The greatest happiness is to vanish your enemies, to chase them before you, to rob them of their wealth, to see those dear to them bathed in tears, to clasp to your bosom their wives and daughters." This wasn't just rhetoric, it was his lifestyle. He had hundreds of wives and concubines taken from every corner of Eurasia. But here is where history meets modern science, and the result is mind-blowing. A groundbreaking genetic study revealed that approximately 0.5% of the entire male population of the world carries a specific Y chromosomal lineage. That translates to roughly 16 million men alive right now who are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. Think of the scale of that. In the region of the former Mongol Empire, that number jumps to nearly 8% of men. One man's genetic legacy is so overwhelming that 800 years later, millions of people walking the earth today are living proof of his conquests. His DNA is arguably the most successful biological conquest in human history.
These stories are just the tip of the iceberg. There are countless other accounts, like the time he diverted a river solely to hide his own grave, executing the thousands of slaves who did the digging so that no one would ever disturb his rest. But here's the uncomfortable truth we have to live with. Genghis Khan represents the ultimate duality of civilization. He was a visionary who unified warring tribes, created the first international postal system, championed religious freedom, and opened up trade routes that connected the East and the West for the first time in history. He established a Pax Mongolica, where it was said a woman could walk from one end of the empire to the other, carrying a pot of gold without being molested. But looking at the cost, the 40 million lives extinguished, the pyramids of skulls, the use of humans as moat fillers, you have to ask yourself, does the end ever justify the means? Can we celebrate the creation of the modern world if the foundation was poured in blood? He is history's most complex paradox, a genius who built a civilization and a monster who nearly drowned it. If you learned something new from this deep dive into the darker side of history, or if you were shocked by the story of the Russian princess, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We've got more untold stories coming soon. See you next time.